So, can I ask a really basic question? How did spirituals come to be?
That is a really great question, Monica. So I want to first begin by saying it is my belief, my conjecture, my theory that spirituals are the convergence of three essential elements: African American culture and idioms, the social condition of slavery, and the exposure to Christianity, both in terms of the Bible, the use of the Bible, and um, Protestant hymns, Christian Protestant hymns. And I believe that without all three being present and a part of this mix, this stew, we wouldn't have gotten the music of the spirituals, because all of them contribute to this music that emerged from this enslaved community. I think it's also important to recognize and to be mindful of the fact that spirituals are but one facet of music that was created by the enslaved community. And so we could really talk about this music in its gestalt, its totality, by thinking of it as music that came from all the different kinds of music and genre musical forms that emerged from the slave community. So Wyatt T. Walker, who's a minister, formerly minister, I say that's why I say formerly, but also a scholar and a writer. And he wrote a book called Somebody's Calling My Name. And in that book, he talks about how, and not just him, but many scholars actually talk about how the first, Walker, his focus is on the spiritual, but the sacred music of the community, but it's all inclusive in that the first musical utterances of this community would have been the moans and groans that they uttered on the slave ships on their way here. It's important to note that they had no common language. And so we won't see them create songs until they get a grasp of this common, which would have been at that time English language. So you got the moans and the groans and some chants. And then you have, with the exposure to Christian hymnody, you'll start to hear them singing Protestant hymns, but also there are work songs, there are field hollers,
Mm.
there are Jubilee songs. So all kinds of music is coming out of this community. And the music that focuses on not only their condition of slavery, but refracted or informed by their understanding of Christianity is what creates these religious folk songs that were initially thought of and called sorrow songs by people like W.E.B. Du Bois, scholar, first writer that graduated, first African-American that graduated from Harvard. And he referred to them as sorrow songs. So did Frederick Douglass. But then eventually we started to call them, or they started to be known as Negro spirituals. Negro to distinguish them from the spiritual music that was, and folk music that was being sung by the white community. So hence Negro spirituals. I think it's also important to note when we're talking about how this music came about, that Zora Neale Hurston, who was a writer from the period of the Harlem Renaissance, she said, she makes a distinction and to call this music the spirituals as opposed to the sorrow songs, because this religious folk music wasn't only sorrowful. And so since a lot of people are saying, oh, the sorrow songs are the slaves, she said, yeah, but you can't use that as an all-encompassing term, because there were more feelings and topics and emotional expressions that came from this music beyond just sorrow and melancholy. So when people were jubilant, they sang, and they could have had religious lyrics, lyrical content, but these were still the religious folk songs. So I think a better and more exact descriptor and nomenclature would be the Negro spirituals, which are sacred folk songs sung by the enslaved African community during the antebellum South.
And in a nutshell, how would you say that spirituals tell the African American story?
It is James Cone, theologian, who I had the opportunity to study with at Union Theological, Seminary in New York City, who said that these songs are historical documents. They tell about the suffering, the thoughts, the expressions, the feeling, the struggle of um, African Americans in this country. But as I talk and teach about this music, I make the distinction that it would be incorrect or not quite precise to call the Black community in this country prior to 1865 African Americans, because legally in the Constitution, Black people were defined as property and slaves and non-citizens. So technically, we were not citizens, hence we can't be thought of as African Americans legally in this country until after the ratification of the 13th Amendment. So I think if we're talking about Black people in total, in the wide picture, it's fine to say African Americans. But if we hone in on that period, most scholars today would say enslaved Africans, because we weren't granted the right of citizenship.
Yeah. So you are choosing a different spiritual each month to help tell the African American story over the next year. And our viewers can find your writing about this on our classical page at cpr.org. And of course, we're going to feature these spirituals on the air on CPR Classical. Can you tell us here, we're still at the beginning of this journey in our second month here. What would you, M. Roger Holland II, like to achieve by the time we're done?
I would like for folks who perhaps have been unfamiliar with African American culture to develop an appreciation for the journey and the experience of African Americans in this country. Also to garner and to develop a respect for, an appreciation of who we are as African Americans in this country, full citizens that contributed to the history, to the wealth, to the development, to the evolution of this country, in our genuineness and in our authenticity. And just understand that it is as much a part of the American story as those who would, this is in some ways comical to me, but who got here on the Mayflower, or landed at Plymouth Rock historically. But there were so many others that came past that, our Italian immigrants, our German immigrants, our Polish immigrants, all of the European-based immigrants that came to this country and claim it as their own. Yet African Americans still struggle to be fully accepted. It's not that other immigrants didn't have their struggle once they got here, and it took a while before they were accepted. But one of the things I've talked about in seminary is that for the majority of, if not all, Europeans that came here, by virtue of their white skin, they eventually were able to blend in. But by virtue of our Black skin, no matter how long we've been here, that full acceptance has never fully occurred, because we can't blend in that way.
Yeah, yeah.